Welcome, everyone. I, Councilmember Hunt, call the September 22nd, 2022 City Council Planning, Development, and Environment Committee meeting to order. I am Councilmember Hunt, and I am joined today with Council President Walsh. We will start with public comment. There are multiple public comment opportunities at tonight's meeting. There will be a general public comment opportunity at the beginning of the meeting, or you can make comments after the presentation and council question and answer period on tonight's agenda item. Members of the public may address council at this time in person or virtually. Those who are signed up in advance to make comments will be called on first. If you are joining us virtually and would like to make comments, please raise your virtual hand. If you're on the phone, that will be to press *3. And if you joined by computer, if you joined by computer or smartphone, look for a hand icon. This varies by device. One option may be to go to the participant panel and choose the raise hand icon in the lower right-hand corner. And if you are in the room and did not sign up, I will ask for other speakers before closing the portion of the meeting. So I will wait for a moment to see if there are individuals lined up to speak this evening, and if so, I have some additional information to read.
Yes.
Okay. Citizen comments are an important part of the public process. We take them seriously and factor them into the decisions we make. Please direct comments to the whole committee and not individuals. And while this is not a question and answer session, we will contact you to follow up if needed. When recognized, please unmute your microphone or step up to the lectern in person. And please state your name, address, and relationships to the city. Please speak clearly and pause frequently, and please limit comments to 5 minutes. And if you are attending virtually and do not respond after your name or phone number is called, or if your connection is lost unexpectedly, the meeting will need to proceed. You are encouraged to rejoin the meeting if able. And clerk, can you please identify the first person who has signed up to speak?
Yes, we do not have any members of the public attending virtually, but we do have 2 individuals in the room who've signed up to make comments. The first is Sam Diaz.
Sandra, if you could press the button on the microphone and it'll light up red.
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. My name is Sandra Diaz, and I own a food trailer. The location is in Gilman Boulevard, 145 Northwest, since almost 5 years ago. And it's been really, really nice. The community is great with us. We have a lot of comments about the food, about the location. We have about 160 Yelp comments, 5 stars, like 260 Google reviews, 5 stars. And people always say something like, I'm so glad you're here. Your food is wonderful. Thank you to be here. And we make us feel really, really accepted. My daughter and I work together. We own together the food trailer, and it's the most important thing for us. I don't know what else can I say. The community is the most important thing for us. I'm trying to help people who ask me about how to do the business, because I think I was the first one since 5 years ago. No food trucks around my food trailer. It was a little slow at the beginning, and now we have around 90 people every day at the lunchtime. So it's been really busy, really busy. And people want to come to Issaquah, and please don't forget to come to Sochi to eat tacos. And people asking every time, are you gonna work for winter? Are you gonna be next weekend? So people is really, really interested. We have people from everywhere. That's incredible because people from everywhere around Seattle, Yakima, I really don't remember where, Monroe, people is coming to Issaquah just for eat tacos. So I feel so proud of be part of this community. I don't know what else can I say. I think that's it.
Great. Thank you very much for your
Thank
comments,
you for
Sandra.
listening to me.
Thank you. Clerk Geezer, are there additional individuals signed up to speak?
Yes, the next speaker is Sandra Favet.
Another Sandra. Is it on? Okay. Hello, my name is Sandra Favet. I'm a resident of Issaquah. My kids grew up here in Issaquah. I own La Chingona Taqueria in Bellevue, and I'm very blessed that City of Issaquah usually hires us for events. We've been feeding you guys a couple of times. We finally got approved for a permanent location here in Issaquah, Lowe's, after 2 years of trying. So it was a shocker when they're trying to change the rules, which I'm pretty sure that it's for the good of everybody. And a friend of mine, Jimmy Mata, the mayor of ADJOURN, I don't know if you guys know about the pilot that he did for the taco trucks. Have you guys heard about that? He started with 6, now he has 3, and I don't know if it worked. It was for a year, a trial that he's been doing, so I was thinking, like, maybe you guys want to do the same. I don't know if that's the route. Lowe's has been asking blueprints, uniforms, cleanliness, this and that, and we're so happy to do that because we are in our taco truck. It's colorful. As you can see me, I'm colorful, and this is every day. This is how I walk, and I'm very proud. I want to bring color. I want to bring culture to the city of Issaquah, my city. I want to bring it to here. And I understand that there has to be rules. Maybe too many trucks will be a trouble. I get it. But maybe we can have it work, permits, whatever you guys need. Like Lowe's gave me a bunch of lists. It's been a hassle, and I'm so happy doing it. Like $2 million, this and this and that, whatever you want, I will do it. It's really hard to work in a taco truck. I wish we could afford a restaurant. Taco truck, winter, it's so cold. My cheeks get burned, I swear to God. Every day we have to get the delivery of the food. When we're done, we have to take everything back to the kitchen. Every single day, even the water, because even the water is not allowed to be drained on the city. It's not allowed. I don't know if you guys know. So we take it in buckets every single day. We follow the rules, same as restaurant, probably more. Winter, very cold. Summer, oh my God, it was 100 degrees, and we were working hard. We were working hard. Why? Because we're hard workers. We just want to work. That's all we want. We're not asking for handouts. You guys want to follow the rules? We'll follow any rules, but please, please, let me be part of my community. Let me serve my community. My boys are so excited that we're going to be here. You guys have supported us a lot. I do a lot of high school. The high school, Issaquah High School, is my high school. Lacrosse, football, I'm always there supporting. I'm always there doing everything for the high school. I haven't done middle school because they haven't asked. Maybe I should offer. But I'm part of the community. You know what I mean? I want to be part of the community, and I'm not saying let's not do regulation, do whatever. Maybe a regulation like they did in ADJOURN, it will work. But don't take us out completely. Give us a chance to, I don't know, maybe just work a plan to make it work for everybody. What else I was going to say? Oh my God. And everybody said, don't go. It doesn't matter what you say. They already have it. I'm like, should I not? Should I? What should I do? I'm like, okay, what the heck? And I went and looked for all of them. I'm like, let's go, let's talk, let's see if it can make it happen or not. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Clerk Geezer, could you call the next person to speak, please?
No one else has signed up.
You are welcome to come up and speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I think I came a little bit late, but I was just able to close the food truck. My name is Hugo Barraza, and I'm the owner of Nor Baja Food Truck, and just recently opened 2 months ago. These Wowens means a lot to me. They're an inspiration for myself. I know both of Sandra's, one more than the other, but hardworking women as I ever seen. And I wish my wife was here as well, but she needs to be closing the food truck that we own right now. So someone needs to stay there to work in order for me to be here. You know, I was here the past council, and I read everything that's been proposed to the code. And it really, you know, it shocked me when I first saw it. And I want to say it again, and I want everybody to hear it, because I put every single penny I had to be able to open 2 months ago. And I feel like you guys want to kick us out. Like that, I felt it like that, because limiting the time of operational during the year is the same thing. It's really hard to find locations to operate. I spent months to be able to find the Grange who will open the doors for me to be a stay there, and they know it. Sandra has been looking for it for months. 2 years, I'm sorry. And I was a little lucky, I believe. Really lucky. And I don't understand where that's coming from, because I understand regulations, you know, permits, stuff like that, but limiting a business to operate in the city, it will just make me leave town, and it hurts, because this is what I want to be. This is what I've been living the past 5 years. I believe this is where my kid will go to school. It's in Valley dual language program, and I think someone here needs to point out all the regulations we already regulated on, because, you know, last council someone said that maybe adding more regulations will be the ideal situation, to like another permit or something like that. And I kind of want to say what we already have, so you guys will understand a little better, in case you guys not aware of. I'm not saying you are. I just want to say it publicly and out loud, because we are very regulated. Starting from the commissionary kitchen that every food truck has to have. And we can say we can spend about $1,500 or $2,000 per month, one thing. Then we have to pay rent, right? It can go from $1,000 to $2,000 per month. That's the other thing. You need to be insurance. You need to have the city, you name it, $200. Health department permit to operate, another $2,000 per year. And Secretary of State, Labor and Industry to have employees. You have to pay IRS. You have to pay a ton of things. I had the pleasure to be invited to Issaquah. That was my first event about 2 weeks ago. It's gorgeous up there, and I really like it up there. And I also had to pay a permit, because I don't have a business license in Issaquah, so I had to get a temporary permit. They made it on the snap for me, because they were in a hurry. The last food truck canceled on the last minute, so they needed anyone to be there. I was able to pull it through. It went great. But anyhow, I'm sure I'm missing a lot of stuff already. But just to put you guys in context, there is a lot of things a food truck needs in able to open every single day. And I'm not even gonna start with opening and closing, because that's really hard. But we're here in the city of Issaquah. This is where we are. You guys have the decision more than we probably do, but we're joining together to try to be heard, and probably you guys will help us out. I wish we can all be on the same part, full of food trucks in the city of Issaquah, so we all can be a happy family for sure. Thank you guys for hearing me out. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Clerk Geezer, has anyone else indicated a desire to speak, either virtually or otherwise?
We have had one member of the public join virtually, and I do see that he's raising his hand. So Ashwin, I'll go ahead and make you a panelist now. you should see the option to unmute and can choose to turn your video on.
Thank you very much, City Council and the Administrator, for giving me an opportunity to talk about this issue. I do understand there's a process in getting a food permit and all that stuff. It's well established. So any business that plans to go put up a food truck has to go through the process, and they are doing business right now in the city of Issaquah. There are several food trucks who've been in business for quite a while. I'm talking about years together. Right by the Chamber of Commerce, the alley that's right by the Chamber of Commerce, there are two trucks, if I'm correct. And by the way, I am the owner of the Chevron in Issaquah at the intersection of Front Street and Gilman Boulevard. And I have an establishment who's leasing my space, the private property. And actually, right now, I have a right-of-way as well on my property. So the food truck is placed on the right-of-way, but they can actually move on to the next parking spot and they will be in my private property, right? And we have a lease in place. The food truck has been in business for more than a year now. And they've kept the premises clean. They've been doing business good, and they've been serving the customers locally. And what my concern is what is the city going to be dealing with when there is a proper establishment that's following rules and going through the process and doing a legal business on a private property? What is the purpose of this? That the city is coming in and putting rules that restrict that operation of that business. I'm trying to understand that. I don't seem to get that clarity, and I hope I get visibility, and so does the business that's on my premise get that visibility as well. If there are any concerns with the current operations on my property, which is a private property, or on the businesses that are on the lane, on the alley, by the Chamber of Commerce, I think the city should bring that up with the businesses and have the discussion. But I don't believe there was a discussion that took place involving those businesses. So there are businesses that get affected because of this changes, and I really hope that the city takes into account our concerns as well while making decisions. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Clerk Geezer, has anyone else joined the meeting?
No.
Indicated desire to speak? Okay, and I'll just look out at the audience in case if anyone else would like to make a public comment at this time. Okay. Great, well, thank you very much for coming to our meeting and making comments. Before we go to the business items, I did want to just make a note on process. So this committee has usually 3 committee members. Councilmember Ray is excused this evening, and this committee will make recommendations that will go to the full council. So we do not take final action on anything at this meeting, but we will be discussing later this evening ID 1249, which is Title 18 Administration and Procedures, one part of which is the code regarding food trucks, which we heard several comments on tonight. And then one additional comment is we have a public comment at the beginning of the meeting, which we just closed. We will also have another public comment opportunity later after the presentation and question and answer period for our item. And additionally, at any time, you can submit comments to the full council at citycouncil@issaquahwa.gov. And that's a good way to provide comments as well. With that, we'll move to approval of the minutes. The minutes are from our September 7th meeting. Is there any corrections or comments on that? Okay, then I move to approve the minutes from the September 7th meeting as in our packet. Aye, okay. Then we will move to our first item of the evening, ID 1249, Title 18, Administration and Procedures, and this will be presented by Director Dhaliwal, Director of Community Planning and Development. Director Dhaliwal.
Good evening, members of the council and community members in attendance, both virtually and in the room. I'm going to try and share my screen and bring up an PowerPoint here real quick. Can you all see my screen? Right. So tonight, we're in front of the Planning, Development and Environment Committee on our Bucket 6. So this is the last of the topic areas for Title 18 update, which is the complete overhaul of Title 18. And what we're asking the committee is if there are any additional considerations for Planning and Policy Commission to study before they finalize their recommendation to City Council. So we're asking if the proposed changes meet the goals and outcomes, or if there are additional topics we should consider before making the final edits to the consolidated draft, which will be a public hearing in front of the Planning and Policy Commission. For this particular topic, there are 5 pertinent goals. Goal 1, protect forested hillsides, increase public awareness. Goal 5, effective management of travel. Goal 10, and modernize the code and incorporate best practices. Goal 13. So these are goals that the Council Ad Hoc Committee had created for this update. In your packet, we have a laundry list of topics that we will be covering. However, based on the number of topics, the last topic, process and procedures, we'll be covering that on October 6th. So if anyone in attendance is here for the last topic, that'll be discussed on October 6th. So we'll take the wireless communication facilities first. Really, the change here is minimal. There are some changes, but they're really intended to align with procedural code changes. So federal FAA has come up, or FCC has come up with strong mandates for timelines and things like that that we've incorporated in this code. There's some guidance for permit review and application process that's in here. And again, the focus really has been timelines and process changes and some clarity in language. At one point, we were talking about making some substantive changes, but those were not part of this current code update because the Planning and Policy Commission had just updated the wireless chapter about less than 2 years ago. So that's wireless. SEPA rules, again, we tried to go through the federal and state law requirements and updated multiple sections for clarity. Exemption levels, I'll get into those a little bit more in detail. Those are the main substantive changes here. And public notice requirements. Under the state law, we're required when we make a determination to circulate that. However, we feel earlier notice of application, which isn't technically required under the state law, is better use of everyone's time. So we're not surprising people with here's a determination. So we've added those kind of notice requirements and broadened the notice requirements from 300 feet to 500 feet, notifying the property owners and tenants. 45% of the population in Issaquah is renting. So we want to make sure all community members get that notice. And then we had a list of planning documents that have long been, redone. So we've referenced the latest updates to that. The appeal section has been clarified. So those are things we've made. So now let's get into the policy discussion of this minimum threshold. So a little background on these. So Department of Ecology comes up with the maximum thresholds that the cities can adopt through their ordinances that they can exempt from going through a SEPA process. And so we looked at our peer cities and the maximum thresholds established by state law. So for single family homes, under the state law, up to 30 units don't necessarily have to go through SEPA review process if the cities choose so. For multifamily, the maximum is 60 units. For agricultural structures, it's 40,000 square feet. For commercial structures, it's 30,000 square feet, and then there's a separate threshold for grade and fill amounts. Issaquah's thresholds are the lowest of any of our peer cities. One of the reasons is because these updates from ecology have happened over the last couple of decades, and we haven't touched our SEPA chapter since that time. So we haven't really looked at this for some period of time. The issue with going through SEPA for Issaquah is, what are the additional mitigation measures that we can require that are not covered up by our code? And cumulatively, if there's an impact, we can use SEPA as a mitigation tool. The second part is we have established mitigation fees, which are different from impact fees, but they apply for like police mitigation fees and government services, building fees, which are nominal. They're not significant. If you look at annual money that the city collect from them, isn't significant at all. But those come into play when projects go through SEPA. So we had this discussion multiple times with the Planning Policy Commission and Development Commission on what is the appropriate threshold to establish for projects to go through SEPA. One of the idea that the Planning and Policy Commission had was, what is it in for the city? Can we tie it as an incentive to give them to increase our thresholds, but we get something in return, such as more sustainable buildings? So we developed that idea, and separate from the SEPA discussion, we've had this discussion with Planning and Policy Commission and Development Commission about the ICAP table and the implementation of the ICAP table. What are we going to require in terms of sustainable buildings? So two separate conversations, but then they merged, so which added to this confusion about where have we landed. And we're looking for this committee to weigh in on what threshold makes sense. So I'll walk you through the questions we asked Planning and Policy Commission. One option is we don't increase the existing threshold. Anything more than 4 units is required to go, single-family units will require SEPA, and so on. Option 2 is to have a moderate increase, which in our column, we presented the last column. I'll get to that in a little bit. Or we can go to the highest level required under the state law. The general direction we got from PPC was really, they were okay with a moderate increase, but coupled with the city gets something in return as an incentive for more sustainable development. When we had the discussion on the ICAP table, and really at that time, the focus was that as a stopgap measure until we really have a thoughtful discussion on sustainable buildings, was that any larger building that gets built in Issaquah should meet some of these sustainable goals that the city has established. At that time, we laid out these 3 options, larger than 10,000 square feet, which equates roughly to 10 to 15 residential units. And at that time, we were having this discussion about the state energy code that's coming away, and that's going to be in effect in July of next year. So therefore, we weren't saying every building has to be sustainable, because some of those requirements would come into play because of the state energy code requirements. The second option was 20,000 square feet or more of commercial building, which equates to 20 to 30 residential units. This is where we landed with them when we laid these options in relationship to the ICAP table. And the reason for number 2 was it doesn't impact the smaller residential buildings. So, the missing middle and such, so 10 to 15 units wouldn't have to meet some of those sustainable goals. Or the largest threshold allowed, which was 30,000 square feet. So somewhat similar, but in these 3 categories. So here we are. The last column here was 10 units and 20,000 square feet. But there really isn't any, the city can adopt anything allowed under the state law. So the one version isn't any better. The draft that you have in front of you includes the maximum threshold allowed under the SEPA. So for single family, 30 units, 60 units, and 30,000 square feet for commercial buildings. But the options to choose from are 4, 10, 20, or 30, or 20,000 or 10,000. At this time, I think the last touch with the Planning and Policy Commission, while there wasn't a consensus on it, but some of the vocal opinions we got on this topic was, general reluctance to raise the threshold to the highest threshold. So I think it's a no to go 30, 60, and 30,000 in general. But really exempting 4 or less without coupling them with the LEED certification requirement. So if someone wanted to build 2 homes, they could do that, and that wouldn't be exempt from that would be exempt from SEPA. We wouldn't require them to get LEED certified. So keeping the code as is for up to 4, but anything from 4 to 10 to 20 would be coupled with requiring sustainable building and third-party certification for that. So that's sort of a summary of where we are on this topic. So if this committee has any direction for us, we can talk further on that.
I think we do have a question at this time,
Sure.
Council President Walsh.
Thanks. Okay. This one was complicated, and I appreciate you going through that as a concept, the difference between what's included in the packet and what came out of the PPC meeting, because I was kind of confused on that. Can you explain what the difference is in development, in the developer's costs, in the results for the city between the kind of standard environmental review that's going to happen on any project versus LEED Gold certified versus the SEPA checklist? Because it's well enough to talk about the buckets, but I need to know what they mean and what the results will be.
Yeah. So a SEPA checklist is your typical SEPA review process. So some of these projects, if someone were to build a 10,000 square foot building under the existing code, and if we go with a 10,000 square foot threshold, would fill out a checklist. It would evaluate the impact on the environment that, and we would assess it. If it's already covered by our code, critical areas, steep slopes, all of that, then we're not going to ask for SEPA mitigation, because that you'll get the mitigation by compliance with the city's code. We have stormwater regulations. Anything related to that would be covered under that. We have concurrency requirements for traffic. So stormwater, traffic, and critical areas are generally the things that SEPA mitigation is required for. Not to say there could be other, the checklist has all those categories, earth, water, any kind of impact to that. So the impact to the applicants would be there's additional review process, but the outcome isn't really any different. So it's not like the city's going to require mitigation because they're going to comply with the code, that those impacts are going to be mitigated by compliance with the code. If it was a far-off project that would have an impact on the environment, then we could use SEPA as a tool to require mitigation. And these fees that we talked about, the mitigation fees, like for police and general services. What we heard during the public testimony was, the cost increase for these sustainable buildings and third-party certifications. For these larger buildings, one of the developers said they get basis points from the banks for incorporating sustainable development. So it's actually, they get a lower rate because they're doing sustainable. So they weren't complaining that this is going to add additional cost to their project. One or two folks have said the certification, the LEED certification, it's evolving. Right now it's gold, but a lot of cities are going towards platinum certification. That's becoming the baseline. So that you can get a sustainable building without going through these certifications, which is true for smaller projects. These can be costly, but for these larger projects, that could be something that would absorb, and it's not insignificant. I mean, it's not a huge cost to get that. And based on some testimony from folks, they were saying, well, the lower rates in itself justifies them doing this. So putting people through SEPA where is added time and cost and money when the outcome isn't that we're going to ask for any additional mitigation, it becomes a redundant process for some of these projects. Larger projects, yes, they would be still subject to SEPA, and we would have that evaluation. I don't know if that provides you enough, what you were looking for?
That gives me a lot, and I think that's useful. I think the word larger versus smaller is where it comes into this metric. And does that differ when you're talking about office or commercial versus residential, whether single family or multifamily? Is there a point where it's cost effective versus not?
Yeah, yeah. You know, our recommendation would be, at a minimum, we should raise the threshold from 4 to 10 units, because as you've seen, none of our peer cities really has 4 units triggering SEPA. Whether you want to go up to 20, you know, if you stay with 10, 10, and 10,000, at least that has brought it forward with the, you know, so we raised from 4,000 to 10,000 square feet and 4 units to 10 units. So that's the lower end of getting the, you know, I think Planning and Policy Commission could support that. I think they were just uncomfortable going larger because they didn't know what SEPA, what we would get out of SEPA, and, you know, so from our recommendation is at least we should raise it from 4 to 10, and then from 4,000 to 10,000 square feet, because there's no point in putting people through a process that is just for the sake of process.
Okay. And one of the things that was kind of helpful for me was in the PPC meetings, you guys were kind of talking about like a 10,000 square foot building was like the Chase on Gilman.
Yeah, we gave them some examples.
Yeah, so what are examples of something that's 20,000 and 30,000?
I think a city hall was about 35,000 square feet, and the library, I can look up, we had that in the packet. I could find it real quick for you.
Okay, that's just a useful metric
I think
in.
the Chase Bank was about 4,000 square feet, so a smaller.
4,000?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, I thought they had mentioned 10. Okay.
I could be wrong, but we'll get you those numbers.
Okay, I had a question. One of our goals with this land use code update is to align with best practices, and oftentimes we're looking at peer cities as you are here. So do any of our peer cities have a combination of this sort of lead? No, so this is, but, okay. So none of our peer cities have this kind of combination approach, but from developers' standpoint, they were supportive, according to the public comment that you were summarizing. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, we could have it separated out. We could just have SEPA thresholds, you require SEPA or not, and then we could have sustainable building developments as a separate threshold. Anything larger than this, you need to go. There is an added incentive for folks to do sustainable buildings and give them an out from SEPA. So, yeah, that's an option for the committee if you want us to keep them separate.
Okay, thank you.
Should I move on to the next topic? Did we have some answers on the square footages? Okay. So if we get the square footages, we'll come back to that. Forested hillside preservation. So this is a brand new chapter. And this was written to meet goal number 1, protect forested hillsides. The critical area code really regulates slopes 40% or more, and development is prohibited on those kind of slopes, but anything below 40%, we didn't have any design standards. So So this chapter was created to create some standards. There is some flexibility built in it for wall heights, terracing, grading standards, if the ultimate goal is to protect those standards. So that's a section in there. And then, primarily to kind of follow the natural contours, protect pedestrian environment, visual impacts, that's been the intent of all of this. One of the things nuances of this thing is also the retaining walls and the heights. So we've added a lot of graphics in this section to kind of talk about where you can put the road, what is allowed and what isn't allowed. Subdivision design, I think one of the questions, Councilmember Walsh, you had was if the whole purpose is to require some of these things, that all lots are same, will that actually be the intent? That was not the intent, to say all lots will have the same kind of topography, but the intent is that you would preserve the steeper sides of the slope, parts of the slope. So it wasn't that you create some flat lots and then one lot that's extremely steep. So we'll fix the language related to that. I think you were asking, couldn't someone create a portion of the site as a TDR? So I think the intent is still to be for folks to be able to do that. So we'll make sure the language reflects that. And then, the other thing we get into the retaining wall and the maximum heights and things of this nature to come into play is what happens with the street projects. So sometimes, by requiring the walls along the streets to be 4 feet, you're chasing the slope, which ends up clear-cutting the steep slopes, which is counter to the intent of preserving the hillside. So we have some exemptions related to that. Whereas the end goal is to protect the forested hillsides, protect the tree canopy. And then accessory and temporary uses. This is where you heard some of the public testimony here. And really the intent here was to clarify, not make any substantive changes. So the heliport standards, we had some stuff which is heavily regulated by FAA, so we've eliminated that. The food trucks, I think, just as a little background, so right now the process is they apply for a business license, they have to get a King County Health Department approval, and we look at whether it's a permitted use, where they're located on the site, and all of this review is done as part of the business license. Now the business license used to be, they had to get a permit from the city, but now it's all consolidated where it's applied through the state. So that's consolidation of the business license. They apply for the UBI, all their state licenses, and then we get notified, and then we do this informal review for the food trucks via email. So it's captured under the business license. So the intent was to kind of simplify it for the folks that come into the city to do this business, and also to have some clarity along what are we reviewing it for. I think the biggest change was because these are temporary uses. I think there was a placeholder put in to say 60-day maximum time frame on private property, and I believe a week along the streets. I think what we heard from the public testimony is there's a 4-hour limit for parking on the street anyway, so 7 days doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Regardless, the PPC discussion on this was perhaps it's an annual renewal license. So you create a streamlined permit where they submit a site plan, they show that it meets fire lane and doesn't impede the traffic and safety considerations. So a simple site plan that's submitted through the permitting process, and then perhaps an annual renewal. So if there's no problem, it's just an automatic renewal or some sort of a streamlined permit process with a renewal built into that. And then the sustainable micro infrastructure was really taking what's already in the code, but consolidating the language to provide some clarity. So those were the changes under the accessory and temporary uses. So we asked planning and policy, should these be limited for how long? And I just mentioned what their feedback was. And should it be a separate permit operating on private property? I think there was some desire to know where these are located within the city, whether it happens through a business license or a separate permit, just with the idea of having a streamlined process that isn't confusing for folks. Now, we didn't get into whether we should limit one per property, have more than one property, but those are all things, the committee can let us know if those are things we should explore or not. These food trucks are not allowed in residential zones. And one of the things that the King County Health Department requires is an access to a restroom. And so, and then there's some fire regulations and things like that come into play. So if there was a vacant residential lot, they couldn't come in and get a business license to put a food truck there. So, through block passages, so the biggest change here was, this was a section in a requirement in the Central Issaquah plan. We heard loud and clear that these, if we require them, they don't really function. They look like private through block. People don't know whether these are public through block connections. It was a lot of confusion among staff and the applicants, and then for general public that use these. So our intent here was to really clarify where these would go, how these would function, how these would be signed that these are public places. So we've attempted to create a map, which isn't like these have to be in these locations, but more about these are general area where it would make sense to have these connections. But that's only in Central Issaquah. We've added some language to have these in the rest of the city, but it's pretty broad section. I think there was a question from you, Council President Walsh, about Talus and Highlands. So there are, in the replacement regulations sections about trails in both of those sections that got carried forward from the development agreement times. And we're looking at that to move into the street section, street standards section. But we'll take a second look at to make sure the intent of where those trails have to come in is carried forward in Title 18 for Talus and Highlands. So I think you were concerned about if there was a redevelopment, would we still have the ability to get those? So we want to preserve that ability, which as far as I know, we're looking at in the street section, but we'll carry forward some language in the through block connection, or at least a reference to that section. And
we have a question before you go on, please.
Okay, can you explain why in one area of the city this would be handled through, you said basically a trails map, whereas the other would be through a through block passage?
Yeah, that's how it's currently set up. So anything in Talus and Highlands has a trails connection, a multi-use trail, a WUNRF. These are things that have specific standards, and those are in the replacement regulations. There's a section in there for those things. They aren't called through block connection. They aren't standards that every so many feet you have to have them, kind of a thing. So, but all of those connections were developed as part of the development agreement. But when a development occurs, those come into play. I don't know, Stephen, if you have anything to add to how Highlands and Talus is being carried forward.
I think what I would add is that when we were putting together the development agreements, we set up multiple different standards of what a WUNRF or even a trail is, which is why it's very similar to what the through block passage looks like in Central. So we were calling them different things even though they're performing and operating the same. And so that's part of what we're trying to simplify with the updated code is WUNRFs provide these kind of options, trails provide these kind of options, and through block passages, particularly in Central, is this option, which is primarily just going to be non-motorized access to break up the blocks.
Okay, so coming through that, then I have two areas of concern. One is like this concept of however the trails were designed in the Highlands, is very easily recognizable as public access. And so whatever is there a way to capture that in this through block passage design? Because it obviously, there's some kind of aesthetic there that's not just related to there's a sign. So is there a way to use that in here?
Yes, there is. Part of it, when it was designed in Highlands, it's part of a larger network. So when you get to a street, you see a connection across. It's a little more intuitive that it's a public access. And that's how we're designing the code, or at least the standards for through block passages for Central.
Okay. And then the second part is obviously with the Highlands and Talus, making sure that these through blocks are continued to be required if any redevelopment happens. So it sounds like you're saying that isn't currently protected or required with this version of the code. Is that right?
That is correct. We don't have a section on Talus and Highlands in this current draft.
We are carrying forward some of the regulations that would be applied citywide so that trails and the through block passages can be applied, particularly with like cluster housing, which was part of the discussion that we had with the commission.
Okay. So is there anything we can do to include that? Because that seems, well, I'll save my comments for later, but yeah.
You can proceed, I think. Thank you.
So, and then, we added some language for deviations from these things because you can't know for sure depending on the type of project it is and all that. So, but there's some clear guidance on how the deviations would be processed and what the criteria is for that. And then I think the discussion with the PPC was, what about the other neighborhoods? Not these three, but other neighborhoods. Should we require that? So we have some language which is more broad, that if there is an opportunity to have these connections, you could get that. But the real work, could occur as we go through the comprehensive plan updates and have these neighborhood meetings and neighborhood plans. At that time, some of these connections and trail connections and all those things can be further explored, and then they can be codified into the code through the neighborhood planning process. That pretty much concludes these topics. And just so everyone's clear on the next steps, so, we'll get your recommendation or your guidance or direction tonight. Then we will fold all of that into the consolidated draft that will be at a public hearing in November. And we'll be back to City Council, this committee in December with PPC's recommendation if they're able to finalize by then. So that concludes my presentation.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have additional questions at this time? Okay. I did have one question, which is on the food trucks one. So the food trucks is listed under temporary uses, and you said there were going to be changes made to those time limits. But then if the food truck is there for multiple years, is that then because it's a accessory use or the main use? Is that the distinction?
Correct. So, right now, that's what happens. They apply for a business license. They have to renew their business license every year, but it's an automatic renewal. So we would carry forward the same sort of an understanding that it's a annual renewal process.
Okay, so for business owners then, what would be the difference with the new code versus the process that was previously in place before, or actually now, since we haven't adopted this new code?
The draft had the language about 60 days only, and then that's all that you could do. There could be, that was implying that you have to move your truck every 60 days to a different site, and it would go through that process again. That's not how we do food truck licensing right now. but that was that was put in the draft based on the PPC's discussion, I think, was to not have that limit of 60 days, but have some sort of an annual renewal process, which would be what we do now with the business license, whether it's a business license or a streamlined permit process, that can be decided.
Okay, so then the packet, the materials that we have don't reflect the changes that you would intend to make as a result of the PPC
Correct.
discussion in any event?
Yeah,
But,
the draft you have is the one PPC
Okay.
had, yep.
okay, all right, thank you. That was my question. Any additional questions? Okay. Well then, at this time, I will call for public comment on this item. So I'll check in with Clerk Geezer if there is anyone on the line to make public comment, and I will note that there are no members of the public.
We
Or
don't
that
have
would be
any
great.
members of the public virtually. If you'd like, I can quickly ask them if they want to make comments.
I'm sorry?
Okay, so I will check in with the clerk if there's anyone on the line virtually.
No one from the public is on the line any longer.
Okay. I'll just pause for a minute then and might call a recess, actually. Okay. I'll call a 5-minute recess, and so we'll be back in 5 minutes, and then, thank you. All right, we are back. Thank you for that quick break. And at this time, I will go into public comment, but first I just wanted to re-ask the question that I asked right before the break so that we can have shared understanding on this. So for the food trucks code, there was that temporary uses table which indicated 60 days, for example, and then you would have to move the food truck. And so can you explain PPC's recommendation on that and what staff the changes that staff intends to make to that code as a result of PPC's conversation? And then additionally, it'd be great if you could summarize any changes for food truck owners in terms of how operations will go from the current way that we do licensing and permitting to the proposed code once the PPC's recommendations would have been implemented.
Sure. So the Planning and Policy Commission on the two topics, the timing requirements that were added in the draft was to not have a 60-day limit, but have some sort of an annual renewal permit. So you would approve them for a year, but they would come in and get a renewal based on every year, which is how things are done right now, because they apply for a business license, all the review occurs under the business license, and a business license is renewed every year. On the topic of permit, whether it should be still bundled under the business license or have some sort of a streamlined permit process, the fact that the business license review was consolidated with the state review, some of this review is occurring via email. So we're looking at creating a streamlined permit process where they could apply simple site plan, location, and that can be verified to meet whether the use is allowed, whether it meets the setbacks, whether it's creating any traffic hazards or not, and meets fire code requirements. So, and has a King County Public Health Department approval. So a minimal review to meet the safety considerations like that and the use is permitted piece. So we're looking at creating some sort of a permit that with an automatic renewal. So that'll be included in the final consolidated draft with the public hearing in November that we can circulate to all parties of record for the topic to weigh in.
Okay, thank you. So that was my last question. Do you have additional questions? No. So then at this time, I'll call for public comment on this item. And if you could please, if you are wishing to make a public comment, if you could please step to the lectern and state your name, address, and relationship to the city. And please also limit your comments to 5 minutes. You can, oh, and yes, there's a button.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
How's everybody doing? My name is Laz, and I own Laz's Tacos on 25th Northwest Gilman Boulevard at the Chevron gas station. I'm new to the food truck industry, so it's a learning process for me as well. But I did my research, and I have all the permits that I need. I have the city permits, the health department permits, and I think it's just in a great area as far as being on a private property. I consider myself a restaurant, but, also a food truck at the same time, even though I'm not mobile. Some of my permits aren't for moving around. I can't go and park at a different spot or something to sell because I don't have those type of permits. I'm stuck where my address is at, my billing address and my physical address. Like I said, I'm just new to everything, and I just want to let everybody know that, I'm there, but, I'm learning at the same time. So, yeah, and then as far as moving the truck or being on a private property, whether the regulations that you guys are trying to make is you guys don't want it to be there like permanently. Do we have to take it home or, take it to a, some other place where you don't want it, I guess, there every night? It can be moved, and brought back every morning. However, I don't know what type of regulations you guys were trying to make and changes. But as far as right now, yeah, it stays there and it's permanently there. And yeah, that's about it.
All right, thank you very much for the comments.
Yeah.
Clerk Geezer, has anyone else joined us online who'd like to make comment?
No.
Okay, then I will close public comments on this topic, and we can then begin our committee deliberations. And I think we can just go through the items in the order that they were presented. So if you could pull up the first item, which I believe was the wireless communications, then we can just tick through them that way. Okay, thank you. So on this one, I don't think we have any policy questions for us. So for this one, I think, I don't think there's any questions. Okay, go ahead, Council President Walsh.
Yeah, I just had one comment. Commissioner Lewis had mentioned asking for images that have people to scale, and I just thought that was a really good concept to call out for any of the pictures in that scenario, because sometimes it's hard to understand how large really one of the wireless facilities is. But otherwise, I agreed with the changes that were made, and we had touched on this topic pretty recently, so, yep.
And I think your questions via email had some food for thought in terms of the categories for those two. So we'll look at clarifying some language in those categories.
Okay, I think I understand the reasons for these ones, and I agree. We recently updated this code, so I think we can move to the next item. Would you like to start on this one?
Happy to start. I'll start with a little bit of just frustration in going back and watching the meetings with Development Commission, PPC. Those were hard to watch. There was a lot of chaos, a lot of misunderstanding there. So I'd like to apologize in the first place to the commissioners if I kind of take a different tact, because I just didn't feel like there was an overarching conversation that really happened there and solidified in the same way that many of their others do. When I'm looking at the SEPA thresholds, first of all, seeing that other neighborhood cities have increased this, and hearing from Director Dhaliwal about, hey, we already require a lot of these mitigations because we have things in our code that directly address certain areas, I start to think about, well, what are we losing out when a developer looks at our code and says, you're gonna make me do a SEPA checklist if I wanna build 5 units or 4,000 square feet. So if one of our goals is to improve the ability of missing middle, I'm gonna look at this and say, hey, maybe this is a barrier. So I'm pretty comfortable with moving the SEPA threshold up to 20 or maybe even 30 units, or maybe 20 units and 30,000 square feet for the offices and commercial. I think we're already gonna get a fair amount of environmental, building wise from the building code that the state has adopted. So I'm generally feeling a little bit okay with moving up a little bit higher than I think PPC had recommended. And I think I would probably need a little bit more information about the costs of LEED certification for the single family and multifamily residential. I think what you've clarified is for bigger projects of some sort, it makes cost-effective sense because of the rates that they can get from banks. I want to make sure that we're not pushing that too far down, that somebody who's looking at a potential project of like 6 multifamily units, if the LEED Gold certification makes it too expensive, that they would choose to go down to 4. And so I just want a little bit more information, a little bit of understanding, or, you know, something that's going to say whatever choice we make here isn't going to hurt our opportunities for missing middle. So that's kind of where I'm thinking about things. I'm interested to hear what you've got.
Okay, thank you, Council President Walsh. So I was reflecting on that one of our goals with this update is to align with best practices, and we've had code that one of our goals is to make the code more predictable and more understandable and easy to follow and consistent, and we've looked to peer cities on a number of things, including this. So I do have a concern about adding this layer of complexity with the LEED certification options in addition to the SEPA, and kind of having this combined system when none of our neighbor cities have that. It seems like adding a complexity and also bringing us out of line with what other neighboring cities are doing. I agreed with Council President Walsh on the comments about aligning with our neighboring cities. So I think for me, I was looking at more like Bellevue, which has, it's not all the way up to the maximum allowed by the state, but it's a middle ground. It is one of our neighboring cities, and they have 10 units, for example, on the single family residential. So I think aligning, especially as was stated, that it doesn't, the SEPA review is maybe not very effective at these small number of units in any event. So I would, given that guidance from staff, I would also be okay with and supportive of increasing to something like 10 units, or that Bellevue column, basically, which kind of a middle ground column. And I'm also very interested in making sure that we do have incentives for LEED certified buildings and green buildings, but I would like to provide a separate route from that, not have it become something where it's unique to Issaquah, that you have these, this interchangeable set of SEPA and LEED certification type options. I also don't think they quite do exactly the same thing, so that's another reason why I didn't necessarily support coupling them. So yeah, I don't know if there's, if it sounded like you had considered options where you could have a green building program LEED certification, but separate from the SEPA thresholds. And so I think that would be more what I was interested in. I'm definitely very interested in the LEED certification, just not the closely linking to this SEPA.
So it's my understanding that one of the reasons that the LEED Gold was brought up for this was because we don't have the new building code, which would really do many of the same things. So when is that building code potentially going to be adopted? Because it's the state version of that. And is my understanding of that correct, that what we were trying to accomplish was get the same types of things that the building code would allow, but earlier?
Yeah, so the state building code goes into effect July of next year, 2023. It has a bunch of things, on-site renewable energy generation is required for commercial buildings over 10,000 square feet. Even internally, there's some lighting levels for open spaces. So the whole goal there is energy, reduction. And it does it in a multiple kind of ways. So it isn't requiring certification or anything like that, but it just meets those energy conservation goals. So that goes into effect next year. Council will have to adopt it, and we'll bring forward an ordinance and all that for you. But The other, so that goes into effect, and then we can have a more robust discussion with the ICAP implementation of what sustainable building program looks like, but that's on the whiteboard. And this was supposed to be a stopgap measure that if some really big building was going to be built in Issaquah, and we have all these goals adopted by the ICAP, that we would at least require larger buildings to be third-party certified. Now, historically, Issaquah has required homes in Highlands and Talus all to be third-party certified. So the way that process has worked through the development agreement, they're required to be built green certified. And before we give them the final inspection, we get a report that they meet the built green certification. And then, of course, we had the Z homes, so we've been on the way of getting some of this through development agreements or through some other incentives. So that isn't new. However, anywhere rest of the city, it could be an added cost to get built green certification for an average homeowner that's building a new home. So we want to be thoughtful about that, give them options for meeting the same goals, but not necessarily a third-party certification. And third-party certification is also evolving. And then we have other projects like the Poplar Building that use the CLT and meet some of those sustainable building goals, but isn't necessarily a certified, LEED certified kind of thing. So this was our attempt at, with this code update, we at least have a stopgap measure for larger buildings to be required to be third-party certified. And PPC agreed with that when we had that discussion with them separate from the SEPA. And those were the three options we laid. We worked with Stacy in sustainability in laying out these three options. So we could, I guess I'm hearing uncouple the two. If there's consensus on uncoupling the two, then we can go back to PPC, and that's present that as an option. These are the SEPA thresholds, separate, not tying them with LEED certified, but LEED certification for these many units and these many square feet for commercial building required regardless. And that'll simplify to some extent.
Council President Walsh.
And remind me, the state energy code is going to require certain changes for even existing buildings over a certain square footage. So I have to imagine that a large project that's going to be built now knows that the state energy code is coming, that's going to have a requirement, so they might as well build it that way anyway?
Correct, but they don't have to. So, it could be, yeah. So, yes, they might know that the state energy code is going to come in, but they may meet just the state energy code requirements. So this would be making sure that other pieces of the project meet.
Okay.
So our recommendation is, if you want to go with the uncoupling, that's great, that's fine. We would raise the threshold for SEPA to wherever the community and council's comfortable with. But for the meeting the sustainable goals for larger developments, that we at least have a stopgap measure for larger projects to require third-party certifications.
Okay. So is the concept then that we would have this conversation about LEED Gold or some kind of building certification now, or would it be on the future updates list?
It would be part of this code update for larger for 10, 20, or 30,000 square foot, or or equivalent residential units. We would pick one of these and say anything larger than this, you have to be third party LEED Platinum certified. I think that's where most of the cities are going. The gold is no longer the gold standard.
Yeah, so this is the stopgap, and
Yeah.
but we need a stopgap. So for me, as far as the stopgap options, which are displayed here, there's a note that says one advantage of the second option is that it does not add certification requirement for small scale projects such as 9 to 10 units, residential building missing middle, but anything larger than 20,000 would need to be certified. But actually the first one is up to 10 units. So that one also applies to those 9 to 10 units.
Correct.
And so I agree with that logic, but I think it applies to the first item, the first option. And so, you know, based on wanting to have buildings aligned and to support the ICAP, then I would be in favor of that first option using the logic in the second option. Council President Walsh, do you have thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think I agree with option number 1 for sustainable building. I think we disagreed or we didn't come to a conclusion on SEPA. Because what I heard from PPC was 20 units and I think 20,000. What you were proposing was, and I think that was what I was proposing, and you were proposing something more like Bellevue with 10 units, right?
Yes, but also wanting to comply or wanting to bring us into alignment with neighboring cities, which either of these would do.
Yeah, I think that 10 would be a good compromise for PPC. I think some members in the PPC were not comfortable and some community members were not comfortable. So if we go with option 1 here, which is 10 to 15 and 10,000, then just for consistency and ease, we could just keep this at 10 units and 10,000, and, you know, and then that's not to say we can't come back and change it, you know, in the future updates, but that would be a nominal increase from where Issaquah is right now. We would test it out, and then in the future, we can have a future increase.
Okay,
so
I think we are good to move to the next section, if you have what you need on this one.
Yeah, so to summarize, uncouple the two requirements. Option 1 for sustainable buildings, 10,000 square feet or 10 to 15 residential units. For SEPA, we land at increase the thresholds to 10 units, single family, multifamily, and 10,000 square feet of commercial space. Yeah. The next one is forested hillside preservation. You know, we didn't really have any policy questions for you, but this is a brand new chapter. So if you think it met the mark of protecting forested hillsides, or if you missed it, anything you'd like to see more?
I thought that was fantastic. I mean, the fact that we were currently at 40% and now we have a chapter that provides a lot of graphics and really explanation of, and here's what you would need to do if you're on something between 15% and 40. I did have the comment around kind of terracing, particularly on decks, where I think you need either a written or pictorial clarification. And then, let's see. Oh, I had the question about when you're splitting up a lot. I'm not sure that we got to the right point there. And so I wonder if there are any other examples from other cities that might give us some different options. Because I liked the drawings that you had done, and I could see the intention of where that goes, but I think there are a couple other possibilities there that we need to address and deal with.
Yeah, certainly, you know, we'll fix the language to keep the intent that you could have a portion of your site set up as TDR if you choose to do that, or as a tract, as you know, the ultimate goal is preservation of the hillside, so it doesn't necessarily, but the intent is not so that someone doesn't do the rest and then squeezes one lot that's extremely steep and tries to maximize development potential there. So we'll fix that to meet that intent, the language that you brought to our attention. Yeah.
Okay. So this one, we had a goal, which was to preserve forested hillsides, and then this is an added chapter that takes great strides to do that. So I think it's well aligned with our goals for this code update. I was just thinking that because this is a new chapter or a new section, it's probably one that would be especially interesting to look at through the lens of the code testing. because it's new. So using some real world examples might get at some of the sort of edge cases or, real world complexity that would come about through an actual implementation. But yeah, I thought it was pretty straightforward and good.
Yeah, it's one of the 6 categories for testing the forested hillside. So yeah, we will pay more attention on the testing phase of this one.
I think we can move to the next.
Okay. So accessory and temporary uses, we kind of talked about, the real comments here were on the food truck, and really the only issue was the time limit and the permits needed. So we sort of got the direction from PPC to not have the 60-day time limit, and instead go with an annual renewal option. So we'll fill that in the next draft.
I'll go ahead. So on this one, I think because the packet and that code is a bit behind the PPC, or is what the PPC saw, and then there were changes that would be made coming out of that conversation. I think our materials are a bit behind the development or where the conversation has landed. So I like the direction that it has gone after the PPC conversation. One of our goals for the code update is across the city, there are a variety of public amenities, housing types, educational, and other services that contribute to a livable community. And so, I think the food trucks are a service. We had a number of public comments about the importance of the food trucks, and I think, the intent, I think there may have been some misunderstanding about the intent here, especially with the 60 days, but at least from my perspective, I don't think the intent is to make food trucks move every 60 days, or really make it more difficult for the food trucks to operate in the city than they are currently. And I think anything to the contrary of that would go against that goal of having a variety of services throughout the city. So for those reasons, I support the changes. I don't support the code as it is in our packet, but I support, allowing the streamlined process for continued annual updates, and the business permit very similar to the current process, just continuing with that, I think makes a lot of sense to me. Council President Walsh?
Yeah, I would agree. I think an annual option is great. This is a wonderful use of land use that is most likely parking that is not being utilized currently. I think it creates great relationships between existing property owners and small businesses. I did do a little bit of research, and it looks like Kirkland has a situation where the actual property owner is the one that files the permit with the city, because they're the ones that kind of have to certify that their parking is being effectively used and that it isn't harming anybody's ability to get in and out. And so I thought that might be a really good way of handling it, because then you can associate it with an actual location, and be able to do that type of thing. Maybe, I don't know what the actual business relationship is. It may be easier if the application could come from either or. But that was one of the things I was thinking about there. And then there was a little bit of a conversation about Christmas tree lots versus construction trailers versus retail pop-ups. And I just didn't feel like the code was perfectly clear about something that was potentially mobile versus a temporary use of an existing unit. And so I was thinking that it would be a good idea. I looked through like Redmond and Kirkland's code, and some of them do call out construction trailers and kind of what the requirements are for that, and then also retail pop-ups. So I just feel like there's a few little tweaks that we can do there just to make sure that everything is clarified, but I definitely approve of the 1-year concept rather than the 60 days. So I think those were my thoughts.
Good. Yeah, we'll take a look at, the retail pop-ups, and construction trailers usually allowed when there's construction on the property, and, they have to meet ADA requirements. So the building code kind of captures some of those things as well, but we'll see if we can address the retail pop-ups.
Okay. And just one additional thought on this. I was looking a lot at the goals lately, especially because we're kind of into these individual sections, and so trying to use the goals as a framework for making decisions. And we also have this goal, which is one of our umbrella, our overarching goals, to provide a transparent code update process that allows for groups and individuals to engage in the process. So I think just making sure that we are communicating where we are in the process with the business community. We heard several comments from the food truck operators this evening, and just making sure that they that they are able to engage and participate in the process and understand where we are, because it's been a long process, it's a long, complicated process, and I think on this topic we are making the recommendation that the operation of those food trucks not be much different at all than the current regulations. And so just to make sure that that's communicated, and so that those business owners can engage in the process as we go forward.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. I think that's it on this one. Did you have any additional comments on the other accessory uses, or no? Okay.
They can't park in the right of way right now. Yeah. So through block passages, this one, again, Central will make sure the trail stuff in Taliesin Highlands is somewhat referenced or carried forward. The actual standards will move in the street standard section. So any other feedback on the through block passages?
I think, you had comments about, my one thought is that we want to make, for regulations where it makes sense, we want to have the same regulations citywide for consistency and predictability and all of that. And so that was where I thought there could be a conversation. I think, especially with redevelopment, adding these through block passages or having that as an option would be good, but I don't know if you have additional thoughts on this.
Yeah, I came to the same conclusion, because I think the policy questions here for me were, does this only happen on subdivisions, or do we require it with redevelopment? And I absolutely think that it should happen in both cases. Yeah. Otherwise, we lose the option to get a through block when redevelopment happens, and then it's not going to happen again for 50 years. And then the map overlay, I think, is useful, but I don't want this only to happen in Central Issaquah. And so I think we need to somehow, it doesn't make sense to require through block passages in a single family estates area. But there's got to be some way that we can either tie it to certain zones or with certain densities that require it. I don't think it should just be based on block length alone, but I feel like there's got to be a way to incorporate it in more than just the 3 neighborhoods or a subdivision that happens. I'm not sure where that lands us, because I don't want to be too prescriptive and say that something in a single family estates has to have a through block. So I don't know if there's a better way to address that, or if there are any other cities that might be examples for that.
Yeah, I think if I can pull up what we say in so there is a section in there that that is for outside of Central. If I can find it real quickly here.
Yeah, it looks like it's 18.702.040 through block passages outside of Central Issaquah.
Yeah, so I think the note here says we used Kirkland as a model. This section applies to all areas of the city that lie outside Central, may require the applicant to install through block passages and dedicate a public access easement when is incorporated in when our comp plan has something in it, a transportation element. Stephen, feel free to pitch in where we say that in the comp plan. And then a through block passage is reasonably necessary to provide efficient pedestrian, bicyclist, or non-motorized access to the building, such as schools, parks, shopping area, employment center, or transit. So,
I don't know if you're mean to be showing it or not, but we're not seeing it, so.
okay, yes, I was. Let's see if I have to stop sharing and then share again. Is it? Not yet. So let's see. You able to see it? So, you know, if it is shown in our transportation element in the comp plan, or it's reasonably necessary to provide efficient pedestrian, bicyclist and connection to school, park, shopping area, employment, or transit. So it gives us some ability to require it as long as you're connecting to those destinations. And then we say must be accessible, and then some design standards. So we can look at, you know, beefing this section up if there's specific things that you want covered.
I feel like we could add something in there about block length. Could be an indicator that a through block is useful, because I mean, I guess that would be another indicator that effective pedestrian access would be useful, but it's not necessarily related to buildings. Yeah.
So in our presentation, there's this discussion about through block passages, and it talks about that there will be neighborhood planning in the future, and we could, through that process, identify specific through block passage locations through the neighborhood planning process that would be implemented during redevelopment. So I think for me, that seemed to make sense. I was also thinking back to our conversations about block lengths, and you know, it doesn't always make sense to have those shorter block lengths in some of the neighborhoods. So I think the same sort of like that conversation we had where it might go up against a hillside, and so that whole same, I think those same reasons would apply here, that it might not always make sense. Just a longer block doesn't necessarily need that through block crossing. But if you looked at a neighborhood at the neighborhood scale, there might be places where it would make sense, and those could be identified. So that would be my preference, is to go with that, identify a through block passages in the neighborhood planning process, and stick with this because this too with the schools and parks and stuff, because that I think is also important.
Okay.
Okay, so I think that was it for the topics that we had deliberations on. I did want to also ask if you, Director Dhaliwal, could give us an update about the code testing process and yeah, just how that's going and your thoughts on it.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for asking about that. We've been giving it some thought. It's an important part of the whole public process. We had a call for, folks that were interested in being testers. So we sent out an email to everyone that's signed up to be an interested party list for our Title 18 update, which is onwards of 100 plus individuals, and then all boards and commissions and anyone that applied for a land use application in the last year. So as a result of that call, we heard some feedback. One of it was there wasn't enough time to sign up. So we take that feedback seriously. And if there's anyone that's listening or wants to sign up, please reach out to me. But we did get good amount of folks that raised their hand. So we received about 21 people that were interested in being testers. We identified 6 categories, and I can kind of go over what those categories are real quick here. So those were, single-family home renovation adjacent to a wetland, because we've changed our critical areas code. A business remodel in Old Town. We'd heard, the added complexity of some of those regulations and landscaping and things when you have limited room. How do we look at parking and landscaping and things of that nature? A multifamily and mixed-use development in Central Issaquah, so that meet the vision of Central Issaquah. A commercial development outside of Central Issaquah was the 4th category. And then a development adjacent to a mapped shoreline or a major stream. Again, we have had changes in the stream area and the shoreline SMP updates in the critical areas code. And then the last category involving a development on a forested hillside site. So based on those 6 categories, we heard from about 21 individuals. We've identified one person per each of these categories, so we have about 6 or 7 folks that'll become this part of this robust testing team. The other individuals in that team, I'm going to try and reach out to all of them and see how we can engage their services. If they have the time and willingness to be reviewers, but we can share the consolidated draft with them. We can share the evaluation framework with them. We can invite them to the meetings that this core team of testers is going to participate in. So we're looking at how best to engage all of them. And then we've heard from 3 other individuals that were at a business leadership meeting that are interested in being part of the testers, so I'm going to reach out to them as well. The code testing process itself for the core testers involves 4 to 6 meetings with staff to identify the project, finalize the project. We walk them through the code, and we give them an evaluation framework that they fill out, and which will capture, is the code readable? Is it clear? Can you navigate the code? And then general input on the standards that have changed from the existing code to the new code. So the idea here is that the project team can then identify actual improvements to the code that, before the consolidated draft is released for public hearing. So if the committee or anyone from the community has any input on how best to accommodate this additional interest in testing, we're open to that. We really appreciate everyone's time, energy that has gone up to this point. We want to keep that momentum and build on that momentum of making sure, all that feedback is folded in as we are in the last stretches of this update. So that's all I have. Looking for feedback from the committee.
Council President Walsh?
So I guess, that sounds really intense. It sounds like it's a lot of work, and I'm super grateful for anybody who's volunteered, and I think it will be very useful for staff and decision makers and everything. I'm wondering what kind of outcome or report, what kind of results will we see from that shows either this was difficult and thus we're proposing to make this change, or this resulted in a negative effect that we didn't anticipate. It sounds like there's some of that I wonder about.
Yeah, so the evaluation framework is going to be the key to how this all rolls out, and that we are developing at this point. But again, I think you're absolutely right, Council President Walsh, that what's the outcome of this? It's not just testing for the sake of testing, it's what comes out of it. And so our intent is that when we finalize the evaluation framework, we'll share it with you. And then also, when we get that evaluation filled out by the testers or anyone else who's interested in being the reviewer, that we will include all of that for PPC to see. This is what we heard, this is what the testers felt, and then we would say we were able to make these changes based on this testing. So a summary of the changes that we were able to incorporate in the draft as a result of the testing. So that we would take that to PPC and we can bring that back to this committee.
Okay, so there's one piece which is what was the user experience, the readability, the accessibility, the ability to navigate through the code. The other piece is what do we get out of that as far as development. And so for these 6 projects, is there going to be a sense that staff would review what that project would result in with the current code versus the new code?
Okay, so you're thinking comparison between the existing and the proposed code?
Yeah.
For that particular goal, if it's forested hillside that is being evaluated, then what the existing code is, which is no regulations at this time, to yes, we can regulate. Yeah, we can frame it based on that particular topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that would be the way that I want the code to be usable and, easy to interpret from staff and developers, but I also want to make sure we're getting the results that we intended. And the best way to do that is to understand what we would get with a project in the existing code versus new code. The other piece there, and that might be something where if you can present that type of thing to the larger community that's interested in this and get their feedback to say, did the new code result in the goals and outcomes that you would like to see? That might be a way for them to analyze it without having to come to 4 to 6 meetings. Similarly, instead of just looking at a potential proposed project, being able to evaluate an existing project that we can see on the ground and see how it might be different in the new code is another possible way of looking at it.
Yeah, so staff is going to pick a couple of existing projects that have gone through the process. So use those as samples and then use one public project. It could be a road public works project or a parks project. We haven't landed on which one. But there would be a couple of staff and testers looking at existing projects and doing that comparison. But what I hear you is that you would like to see, besides the usability, readability, and ease, a comparison between existing code and that for standards and for process. Did we make the process more clear, consistent, consistent, not convoluted, and then the standard itself. Yeah, we can come up with something like that.
Right. And then my final piece of feedback is I'd also like to see those evaluation feedback forms from the staff. Because if they don't find it easier to deal with this code, now granted, they've probably been in the weeds and writing this and they're getting to be more familiar, but they've been very familiar with the previous code. And so making sure that they're able to find all the standards that they need, that they don't feel like something is missing compared to what they could find in the previous code.
From staff?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's gonna be leaps and bounds easier than trying to.
Well, then I want to hear that because that just justifies all the work that you've done. But yeah, I think that would be an important element because part of this is making sure that staff can get through it more quickly so that we can get back to the developers and there's just clear transparency around what the code is so that it doesn't have to go up 5 levels to get interpreted.
Or, yeah, 10 meetings to figure out a simple question. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, I think that sounds great, so thank you very much for that overview of the testing process. That concludes our one item of business this evening, so do we have any announcements? There being no announcements and there being no further business, then we are adjourned at 8:21 p.m. Thank you.